Oh yeah. So one of my favourite lines from any song ever written was when Paul Weller sang that if people were made to live in boxes, then God would have given them string to tie themselves in at bedtime and stop their dreams from falling out the ceiling. There's a lot of aspects of society where I don't necessarily agree with it, like AI, for example, but I can understand at least some of the appeal. But quite how modernist and especially brutalist architecture became as widely accepted as it is, it's the norm now, is something I find quite confounding. Obviously, brutalism implies brutal, as in, to be harsh, cruel, or indifferent in a particularly cold manner. But it originally meant, like, as in Latin, brutus, which is where that word comes from, it meant dull and stupid. For me, brutalism is a good example of how cruelty and stupidity often go hand in hand. It's egocentrism in architectural form, is what I think modernism is. So egocentric stupidity, right? That's where a person is unable to think beyond themselves, really. And that's precisely what we see, like here. Like most modern architecture consists of these massive monolithic or unnaturally shaped blocks or blobs or a series of them. And, they often completely ignore the historic, architectural, or even natural, like, context of the surroundings. It's like, take the Scottish Parliament building in Edinburgh, which is a very, very unattractive building, in my opinion. You've got centuries worth of these fantastic Georgian and like baronial buildings on the one side. You've got the Palace of Holyrood on the other. But then there's like this little shop of horrors, which is the Scottish Parliament, and it looks like a prison made for ants out of crumpled up cigarette packets. Yeah, just not my cup of tea at all. It looks unnatural, but the placement more than anything, it's as if they're trying to make a bold, arrogant statement, by, like the same as like screaming across a room or performing a stupid stunt or drawing attention to oneself in some other fashion like that. And, it's like catering to this sort of sense of needing to be validated rather than for the comfort of people around you. It's coupled with failing to recognise the humanity of others. You've got towns and cities across the UK, across the Western world in general, that are like being gradually decimated by these acts of architectural terror. Like Birmingham is probably the worst example, or the best, depending on your point of view. But it's hard to it's a long time since I was in Birmingham, and it's hard to imagine in 2026. But Birmingham actually used to be world renowned for like examples of like fine Victorian architecture, like a lot of which was because it was very built up in the Industrial Revolution. So you had a lot of wealth going in at the time, which meant for some pretty grand buildings there. And then come the sort of mid to late 20th century. Now, a lot of people blame the loss of buildings in World War II for this, but almost all of this was concentrated from the 1960s through to the 1980s. So, yeah, that was at least 20, 30, 40 years thereafter. Birmingham's original library, which was on Paradise Street, that was flattened in 1974 in favour of the concrete eyesore that followed. Which, I mean, really, what looks more intellectually stimulating for a place of study and of culture to you? Let's be honest. That itself was later toppled and replaced with something similarly tasteless. I mean, talk about finding a penny but losing a pound. The current one looks as if it's wrapped in barbed wire. And, the thing about barbed wire is the first thought is it's uninviting. Don't go in there. So exactly what message that is saying to the students of Birmingham, I've got no idea. And there's a similar situation across Birmingham. Like one by one, you had grand Victorian designs flattened, and frankly, the rubble thereof would be preferable to look at than what was superimposed on top. Like you've got Paradise Street. I mean, put the S where the D is, and then put a T before the E, and you have pretty much my opinion of what these so-called architects were to British cities like Birmingham. And, you know, it's not just Birmingham that's been uglified piece by piece, like it's across the UK. Like, look at the railway buildings in Stafford, for example, or the town hall in Sunderland. You know, it's like well beyond the UK. That's a problem too. Like, you've got the main financial village in Dublin on the Liffey, which, you know, just, you know, again, just brutalism. Same situation on the waterfront in Oslo. And there's, you know, Shanagar in India, which is a whole other thing. And, you know, I found like the Amazon warehouses as well, big, massive, like half a mile long blocks. Like, you see them, they look the exact same. It's this repetitiveness. Like, you could go to one in Australia, you could go to one in the north of Scotland, it would look virtually identical, really. And it's not just the way that, you know, they build modern buildings, you know, like just look at the way like certain buyers treat old traditional houses. Like, owning a house is hard enough in the UK as it is, and, you know, then to commit, you know, basically aesthetic, you know, ransacking of a fairly expensive and fairly attractive property. Like, again, it's a testament to egotistical daftness, to be honest. And it's not just the fact that these buildings are unattractive. I mean, you know, the Birmingham examples are unattractive by, you know, even modernist standards. Like, well, that's kind of the point. It's not standards, that is a lack of standards. And, you know, but other than that, it's the knock-on effect that the kind of thing has psychologically too. Like, as human beings, we're wired to crave natural textures, you know, sort of tactile warmth and sort of organic variation, you know? And when instead we're surrounded by repetitive cuboid rigidity and, you know, grid patterns and whatever, that can kind of set off feelings of a kind of biophilic anxiety plus mental and emotional fatigue. You know, that's further compounded by the feelings of obvious alienation that you get like associated with these monstrosities. And that kind of leads to a breakdown in sort of community pride and spirit and unity. And, you know, everything around looks so miserable, and it's the motivation. You know, it's like this kind of architecture at the end of the day is it's oppressive, and being oppressed drives down motivation, and it drives down morale as well. So morale runs low, and, you know, folks, you know, they turn to crime as a result. You know, I mean, obviously crime exists and always will, but the fact that, you know, the high crime is concentrated in inner cities and, you know, new towns where the majority of architecture is of this vintage, if vintage is really the right word for that, I think the correlation extends more than to mere coincidence.